Every day, I wake up knowing that the more people I try to save, the more enemies I will make. And it's just a matter of time before I face those with more power.
Lucas here again for another movie review. Today we are talking about The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the second installment in the Marc Webb Spider-Man reboot, and it stars Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy, and Jamie Foxx as Electro, Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn. Now when they first announced that they were going to do a reboot of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, a lot of people were up in arms because when the first movie came out in 2012, I believe Spider-Man 3 came out in 2007, so there was only a 5-year gap between the Sam Raimi films and the reboot. And personally, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Sam Raimi films. They just weren't my cup of tea. So I was kind of looking forward to the reboot. And the first Amazing Spider-Man I thought was okay, nothing great. When I saw the trailers for this one, it just looked like it was going to be silly, kind of, vein of Spider-Man 3 with too many villains and stuff. So I wasn't really looking forward to this movie that much. This Amazing Spider-Man 2 follows the events of the first film, where if you haven't seen the first film, spoilers, Gwen Stacy's dad, played by Dennis Leary, died and warned Peter Parker about seeing Gwen Stacy because he didn't want her being involved in Spider-Man's actions. And they are still continuing their relationship, but meanwhile Peter Parker, Andrew Garfield, has to juggle that while dealing with Jamie Foxx's character Electro, while dealing with his old friend Harry Osborn, and it's really complicated. Complicated is what I feared, and that's one of the main problems with this movie, is that there's just too much going on. First, I will get into what I did like about the film. For the most part, I thought all the performances were pretty good. Andrew Garfield, I still think, is a perfect Peter Parker / Spider-Man. I think he's extremely likable, very charming, and then also when he's in the suit, he's believable in the action scenes. So I think he's great, and I really just wish this guy would even work more, because I haven't seen him do a lot of stuff since Spider-Man, but I do think he's fantastic. Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy is really charming as always, really funny, very believable, and the relationship between Peter and Gwen is probably my favorite thing in these movies. As for the villains, the Rhino is in here as like a cameo, played by Paul Giamatti, and he's pretty terrible. He's really laughable. He's playing like a Russian criminal, and I don't know why you couldn't just get someone that was actually Russian or European, because Paul Giamatti's Russian accent is so terrible, and he's extremely hammy. Luckily he's only in the movie for about 5 minutes, but he really didn't need to be included in here. Also, Jamie Foxx as Electro, I'll get more into him later, but wasn't a big fan of him or the character, but I did think that Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn was pretty good. As we all know, Dane DeHaan is a pretty up-and-coming actor. As I was saying before, I think the strongest thing for me between this and the first Spider-Man movie is the relationship between Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. And this is coming from, these movies are directed by Marc Webb, who directed 500 Days of Summer, and you can tell that he's best with human relationships, especially romances, because to me that is by far the strongest thing about this movie or the last movie. They are so good together, and obviously they have great chemistry because they're a thing in real life, supposedly. So that to me was the most believable thing in the movie, and it's so natural for them. And with all this, special effects and guys shooting electricity things at each other and guys in suits, that's the one thing I think I could latch onto this movie, was the relationship between them. And that being said, there are some pretty cool action scenes in here. I didn't see this movie in 3D or IMAX, but I'm sure some of the scenes would have been pretty damn cool. They have a couple of cool slow motion stuff, and the film does move at a fairly brisk pace for being 2 hours and 20 minutes. This movie has a lot of problems, one of them being Spider-Man 3 syndrome. This film just has so many storylines going on at once, and because of that, none of them really get developed. Like in the last film, they promised that we would get the untold story about Peter Parker's parents, and they tell you what happens to his parents in this one, and it kind of permeates throughout the story, but not really, and it's underdeveloped, and the actual reveal of what happened wasn't that interesting or surprising. We also have Peter dealing with Gwen and their relationship between him feeling bad about not keeping his promise to her father, and then we also got the whole Jamie Foxx Electro thing, and then we got the Harry Osborn story with Peter Parker and Harry Osborn being like childhood friends, which they don't really develop at all. So they just have so many things going on here, and none of them really have the emotional impact or the development that they should. Probably the prime example of this in the movie is with the villain Electro, played by Jamie Foxx. He's a guy, before he turns into Electro, he's just this really nerdy guy who's kind of an introvert that doesn't have really any friends, and so because of that, the film wants you to feel sympathy towards him, but you really can't, because one, they don't develop him enough, and two, he just doesn't seem like a real person. Like, for example, there is a scene between him and Gwen Stacy in an elevator, and they have a conversation, and Gwen Stacy says goodbye to him, saying like, "Goodbye, Max," and he's like, "What? She remembered my name," and he literally met her 2 minutes before. So just stuff like that, and him being completely obsessed over Spider-Man with one encounter, to me, he just kind of made him seem like a Rupert Pupkin type, but not as interesting or believable. His appearance is cool, even though he kind of looks like a blue slushie in a hood. But overall, Electro is probably one of the most laughable and weak villains I've seen in a comic book movie in a while. Electro's motivation to, take over Manhattan and kill Spider-Man, to me, was just completely weak, and his plan doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So for me, he was not only a weak villain in terms of intimidation, but in terms of just motivation, didn't really make a whole lot of sense. I know Spider-Man's supposed to have more jokey kind of comic book feel and tone, but after seeing something like Captain America the Winter Soldier, which takes a comic book superhero movie and grounds it in reality and applies it and makes it more relevant, this movie just really pales in comparison with all the jokey, bad dialogue and over-the-top performances and guys, shooting electricity out of their hands. It doesn't feel real, and of course maybe that's not what the movie was going for, but it just seems like comic books have evolved to a certain point where they can be taken seriously and have more subtlety, and this one doesn't really have any of that. Unfortunately, Amazing Spider-Man 2 does a few things worse than the last Spider-Man movie, and does a few things better, again, establishing and developing the relationship between Pete and Gwen is by far the best thing this movie has to offer. But if you're a Spider-Man fanatic, you might enjoy this, but as someone who hasn't really enjoyed any of the Spider-Man films all that much, this hasn't really swayed me in any other direction but meh. So I'm going to give the Amazing Spider-Man 2 2.5 stars out of 5. That's my review of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Let me know what you guys thought of the film. Where does it rank compared to the last Spider-Man film or the Sam Raimi films? Do you like this series better or the old? And did you think this movie suffered from Spider-Man 3 syndrome with too many villains? So if you like this review, you could please subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys later.